Michigan.
Thompson.
Present via teleconference from Scottsdale, Arizona.
All right, PJ.
You're fired.
Christians.
Present from teleconference from Holland, Michigan.
And it looks like at an office at Hope College, so love it.
Yes, it is.
Peugeot.
I am present via teleconference from not Scottsdale, Arizona, but Holland, Michigan. Yes, I am there.
Feltman.
Oh, you have to try that again, Boyd.
Bah. I said I didn't have any smart quips, but I guess I got outsmarted myself. Present from Holland, Michigan via teleconference.
Excellent. And then I'll just keep my eyes out, but I think everyone heard, we do know that Travis Williams wasn't able to attend, but that's one of the great benefits of everyone can go back and watch this full meeting. And then we'll also keep our eyes open. Again, Scott Court, just with the craziness of his job in the middle of COVID, I'll keep my eyes out for him if he's attending, and then let everybody know, but I don't see him right now. So with that, Brian, I will hand it back to you, sir.
Okay, thank you, Keith. Appreciate it. Thanks everybody for being here. Happy February. Time is flying right along. Special thanks to Andrew Reynolds for joining us today. We will be learning all about how the calculations are calculated. So this will be good. I'm excited for Boyd's questions already. So anyways,
Now there'll be no questions.
I'm counting on questions out of you. That's
Looking for levers. We're just looking for levers.
We're looking for understanding to empower new vision.
Write that down.
So let's get things rolling. We need to approve the meeting minutes from last meeting. Do I have a motion to approve those?
Motion to approve.
Thank you, Tim. Any seconds?
Second.
Thank you, Boyd. Any discussion or commentary about the
We didn't have any misspellings this time, Nikki?
No, okay.
All right. All in favor of approving the meeting minutes from last time? Aye.
Aye.
All right.
Any opposed? All right. Thank you all, and Tim and Boyd in particular. Moving on to the public comment phase of our meeting. Would anyone that is joining us like to chime in?
I would if I could.
Great. Is that, yeah, go ahead and introduce yourself, and you have, I think it's 3 minutes.
Oh, well, I'll make it fast. My name is Steve DeYoung, and I've lived in Holland since coming to Hope in '71. I live in Stir Meadows off 40th, and I appreciate the time that you're giving to me to talk about energy and emissions in the city. I assume getting to zero CO2 emissions is our goal. And to do that will require electrifying all or most of our city's energy consumption. I've worked for Lakeshore Habitat for Humanity the last 18 years. We build homes and sell them to people in the 30 to 80% of median income range using zero interest loans. Over the years, we've transitioned our homes heating from gas to electric and then back to gas. We switched away from electric because heat pump technologies at the time were difficult for our contractors to install and our homeowners to operate. I would like to see Habitat and other builders in Holland begin to transition our housing stock from gas to electric. And to do that sooner rather than later will probably take some incentives, especially for homeowners in our Alice community, which is all of our Habitat owners. Habitat just built in Hamilton our first electric home in several years. It was not by choice or incentive, but because Michigan Gas would not extend their gas line 150 feet this year. So we were forced to go all electric in the home. We used a new Fujitsu ducted heat pump system that appears to solve most of the earlier problems we had. But installing the system increased the cost of the home by about $3,000, which we thought the Habitat homeowner would have to absorb in their mortgage. Fortunately, we were made aware by Habitat Michigan that there was a consumer's energy incentive that would cover the cost of the installation. So that what turned out to be an unfortunate situation turned into a very good one because we were rebated over $8,000 for the installation.
Wow.
Habitat is currently building 5 homes off 40th, again using traditional gas furnaces. But we will begin building 18 more homes off 36th Street in 2022, and the design of those homes is in process now. Habitat is discussing whether these homes should be built as net zero ready. Cost is obviously a big consideration. Just as the city is incentivizing upgrading the efficiency of their older housing stock, I would encourage you to create incentives for the electrification of our future housing stock, especially for our Alice community, so that Habitat and the rest of the community can transition from gas to electric heat generation affordably and as soon as possible. Then, as BPW transitions from gas to alternative electrical generation, our homes will also reduce their CO2 emissions. Those are my comments. Thank you for your time.
Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Would anyone else like to share? I think I see a hand there. Yeah, Dale, you're up.
Thank you. I'll be kind of brief today. I'm following up on a statement I made, I think it was October 21st, to the council when they proposed an alternative fuel vehicle equipment purchasing policy. I share everybody's concern in energy conservation and the desire to minimize the impact on the environment. However, I don't see anything in anything I've read anywhere from the city or the area that shows. I feel like that y'all are missing an important piece of the picture. You're just looking at it from the charging station on. You seem to be in your advocation, like the one we just heard, for a transition to electric vehicles and electrification. I think that might be really nice, but what we're not considering is a full life cycle assessment. If the power that is supplying those charging stations is not green, then the electrical vehicles are not green. And so you don't have a green vehicle if you've got dirty electricity feeding the green, feeding the charging stations. Are you all considering the full life cycle, or are you doing just as what it seems like you're doing, is only looking at it from the charging station like that was just a free source of electricity with no environmental impact? I also think there's other issues related to electrification that's not being considered, and that's ethical issues related to all that's involved in mining the special materials for getting the batteries or the disposal of the batteries. I'm not an expert at that, so I don't know how big of an issue that, but I think it's pretty obvious that if you get polluting electric power supply providing power and it has line losses going to the charging station, that your electric vehicles are not green. Now, I do think that someday we'll have all green power supplies, but that's where our focus should be, not just making everything electric right now. So I don't know whether you can respond to my comment, or is there a time where I would get an answer to this, but it seems like you're ignoring this important piece of the picture. So that's my comment and question.
Thanks, Dale. I don't think we're allowed to comment.
Yeah.
Sorry,
You could
this,
interrupt me. I could go rogue here. I won't go rogue. I'll say read the full community energy plan, and I think you'll know we're not ignoring what you're asking.
So is the term life cycle assessment somewhere in there? Can you help me know where I could find the answers to my question? Because it's certainly not in the newspaper. In fact, I was even dismayed to find the Zeeland public schools are going to buy all these buses and they're going to educate everybody. I'm afraid people are getting misinformed rather than.
Yeah, and I think that, all right, Keith, I'll behave. Yeah, we're not supposed to do interaction like this. So so thanks, Dale. Super appreciate your comments. And I don't even know, Keith, you want to tell what precedent is? I'm not good at the rules. I'm just
Or just where I can go to find the answers.
Yep.
It's-
So
sounds like it's
public
on here.
comment is a one-way interaction because we have so many of these meetings. But there's always information out there that you can connect with. Otherwise, you can always connect with staff in various areas and have conversations with them also. And you see two of them on the call here, either myself as city manager or Dave Coster as the general manager at the Board of Public Works.
Keith, like, would he be able to send like one of us an email and then we'd be able to respond off of this format? Is that allowed?
not on behalf of the committee, I don't think. Yeah.
Someone recommended I talk to Peter Bogart, I believe, and he's on this call.
Yeah, Peter's a good person, but also a citizen, not associated with the committee and staff, but I think Peter's a good person. He knows where lots of this information is, so.
Okay.
Dale,
Anyways, thank you, Dale, so much. Really appreciate it. And yeah, sort of the nature of these things we've
Okay.
already.
Brian, let me, if you don't mind, real quick, I can give you an email, Dale. D Coster, so you can see my name up here on the screen. So just
Yeah.
my first initial and my last name at hollandbpw.com.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dave.
You're welcome.
I will leave the meeting now.
Oh, you don't, well,
No, you don't have
Thank
to leave.
yeah, you don't have to leave.
Hey, you're welcome.
Okay. Well, maybe I'll stay on a little bit. Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
I think you seem very interested. So I bet you'll have a lot of learning here if you hang around.
Okay. Well, I'm
Um,
willing to learn. I don't know everything. That's for sure.
You can get in that line right behind me.
The long line.
No one's arguing with that. Come on, guys. Any other public comments?
Hi, yes, I'll give my public comment. My name is Shanley Poole. I'll keep things super brief, but I'm basically here in attendance with the Holland Climate Collaborative. I'm their new intern, so I'm here to just get a feel for your committee and get to know the important work that you are all doing in regards to climate, and also here in support of Steve DeYoung and what he already previously voiced to you guys. So thank you so much for your time and what you're doing. You guys are working really hard around important issues. So I'm glad that I get to be here with you all today. Thanks.
Thanks, Shanley. Good luck with your internship. Anybody else? All right. I'll give it one more second in case someone thinks they're talking, but they're on mute. And cool. So we'll move on to the next item, which is the online, the acknowledgement of the online public comments. We need to have a motion to acknowledge them as part of the official receiving of them in the meeting. So does anyone?
Motion to approve, acknowledge receipt of the online public comments.
Thank you, Tim. Any seconds?
Support.
Thanks, Nikki. Or we don't discuss those, right? Keith?
You could.
We
You
can.
guys can.
Yeah.
Great.
But now that it's on the table, you can discuss all you would like as a committee.
Does anyone have any commentary on those today?
It's nice that people send them in. They're paying attention.
Yep. It took a while to read all the attachments on one of those two. It was good to get myself updated. So it was good.
Great. Anything else stand out to anybody? yeah, I think these have been active every couple of weeks. This is great. So, all right, all in favor of acknowledging the submitted online comments as part of the meeting record, say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, great. Those are acknowledged and in the record. Thank you all. Great. So today we have a little bit of follow-up review and discussion from our last meeting, which was all about renewable energy certificates and carbon offsets. We had Mike Trupis and Ben Massey present to us. So if we want to do any review and discussion of that now, we can, or we can jump right to Andrew and then discuss the whole thing. I'm open to how people want to do that.
And Mr. Chair, if I can just jump in here too real quick. Just a reminder that one of the things that we like to do in this week or this meeting after the educational session is to reflect on the opportunity matrix associated with that section, that lever. And so, as that's being discussed, if you don't mind, Becky, I'll go ahead and if you can allow me to share. And I'll pull up the opportunity matrix that's involved here. Just want to make sure I got the right screen. Yep. So in the area of offsets, again, just a reminder that we've got, current, what's currently happening, the 3 to 5 year goals, which are kind of the focus of the strategic development team, and then thinking longer term into the 5 and 10 year. With the levers along the left-hand side, if we go down to the offsets, what had been developed before in terms of, potential strategic initiatives to explore were the potential of creating a community carbon reduction exchange program here locally. And then the other would be investigating effectiveness and availability of carbon offset purchases. So those are the two things here. I will note that Detroit Edison recently has begun a program too, where they are offering, just like renewable energy credits, they're offering a process for their customers to purchase offsets, and took a quick look at that program the other day. So that's not something that is limited to a local area, but it's just creating a mechanism for customers that want to, use carbon offsets as part of their portfolio management to offset their usage. That's going on right now at Detroit Edison. They're just rolling that out.
Dave, did they make, I don't know all the, I had heard about it. I didn't look into all the ins and outs. Are they pretty explicit around like where what's behind the offsets, like what the projects are?
Forestry projects in Michigan.
Okay. So that's probably actually Ben, I think Ben was talking about being heavily involved with the utility and forestry project. So that was probably.
Yeah. And when I looked at the price of those, I calculated something in the area of around $26 a ton for the value of the offset through their program.
So that's higher. Is that higher than the range Ben was talking about?
Well, again, Ben was talking about large scale buying versus individual buying as well. So I think it kind of depends on that situation. This would be anybody could buy, an offset, and that would be the kind of program they could elect. Again, just like renewable energy, in a way you could elect 25, 50, 75, or 100% of your portfolio.
Yeah.
And just looking at the primary focus of that program is offsetting that, because DTE is also a natural gas utility,
right?
Offsetting the natural gas impacts. And so looking at the amount of natural gas natural gas emits about 117 pounds per 1,000 cubic feet. So, looking at that and the cost of the program, I was able to calculate that around $26 a ton.
I'm imagining DTE's not paying that and they have a markup and they're making a couple bucks on it.
I'm sure they're covering some administrative costs. I don't know what other value streams might be in there, but there's certainly an administrative cost involved.
Sure. The profit value stream.
I'm not going to go there. Maybe that's true.
I'm saying it. I'm saying it, not you. I'm saying
Dave
it,
didn't
not
smile,
you.
but I did, Brian.
Yeah, I got stories from those
So-
that side of the state. Anyways, yeah, cool. That's cool that they're offering it. That's an interesting, I think it makes a lot of sense. People are, it's where they think about utilities is when they get their bill. So something, whether it's literally routed through the city formally or not, but leveraging the bill as a way to market a program, I think is a super interesting.
Well, and the
layer.
other possibility there is to reach out to Semco, who's our local gas provider, and see if they are going to follow suit with a program otherwise too. I mean, that would be the other option there. But you could see the two that are on the list here that we've got, for the short term. And then obviously the longer term, and there's not really an identified funding stream. I'm not proposing anything here, but we talk about, making investments to reach targets that the SDT is recommending and the council would, be adopting in terms of interim targets that offsets as a mechanism to help sort of bridge that, as you move forward. So, but in the short term, you can see the two potential strategies that are identified here right now. And I think we want to just get confirmation as a staff that these are good. Should there be other ones? Should they be tweaked? And it's not the final say. Again, we're just going to try to develop a full list of potential initiatives that you might want to recommend, be pursued to city council.
Yeah, I'm interested from the other committee members, what their take is after last time and what you're seeing here.
Well,
What do you think, Nikki?
Huh?
I said, what do you think, Nikki?
What do I think? I'm always going to say something. I had to watch the video again because, you think you understand it and you miss some. So I watched it again, and I was very interested in carbon offsets and the electric RECs as being that bridge that you mentioned, Dave. And I also, so that's one thing, but I also wanted to ask about the RECs that the BPW and the city use to power City Hall. That has been mentioned once or twice, and it kind of passes. And I wanted to ask, when did that start, and how, when we use those credits, they get retired? Is that from our wind farm?
Right, it's from the BPW's portfolio. So the portfolio is wind primarily.
Mhm.
There's also some landfill gas, and there's also now coming in just recently, there's some solar coming into that portfolio. So we have credits that are greater than the amount that we need for compliance. The compliance level is 15% of our portfolio. So as we have more, people can elect to subscribe up to 100% rather of their usage through the voluntary green pricing program. And that one, what we'll do is we'll take credits that amount to the amount of usage you have, and they get retired on your behalf, essentially. So they are utilized. And so for the city and then the BPW service center and the pumping stations, within the town, that those are all being powered with the voluntary green program as well. So any usage that we have, we're retiring credits that are associated with that.
And so citizens can call into BPW, and I can call in and say, I want all my power to be.
Correct.
Mhm.
Yep.
Yes.
And that will be a penny per kilowatt hour
Mhm,
premium on your bill.
mhm.
So an average customer uses 600 kilowatt hours. Now, maybe not charging an electric vehicle, that might be a little bit more. But so for a 600 kilowatt hour user, that's $6 a month, you know, to essentially real close to that.
So if, as we're looking ahead, legislation might require that 15% to be more,
Yes.
so you wouldn't, you might not have it, what would you do? You have to.
Yeah, so what we would do is the amount, so I should have been a little bit clear. I didn't want to get too technical on it. You actually can subscribe up to 85% more.
Okay.
So you're not going to get billed on any more than 85% of your usage because 15% of it is already in the mandate that's there. So if the mandate would go up to 20% or 25%, then your elective amount would be the difference between 100% and whatever the mandate is. So, you know, your premium would go down as the mandate went up
Sure.
on that because the mandate would be a larger portion of the BPW's expected supply.
Mhm.
Thank you.
And then I'll just add there, thanks, Dave, for jumping in, because as you might suspect, your city manager has a lot of different departments. So he has better detail on some of that. And I appreciate that he did that.
Mm.
But then, Nikki, you were brand new as a council member last year, so I wouldn't expect you to remember this either. But last year in the budget that we had unanimous support from council, staff recommended a budget in April of last year that you voted on in May of last year that for the first time paid that premium amount that Dave just explained. So that in the fiscal year that we're in right now, that started in July, and now the city is paying that voluntary green rate on all of the electricity that we have. And then, as Dave said, the parallel thing also happened in the BPW.
And so, but we can't require that of everyone because it's a voluntary thing yet.
Right.
So
right.
as residents,
yeah.
right? Yeah. I mean, there's a legislative limit on being able to mandate that of all users.
Okay.
Is that correct, Dave?
Yeah. So there's a floor. Just to be real clear, there's a floor that we have to get to is 15%.
Right.
Yeah, and that so that we've met that amount. And what we would do to comply is we would, you know, essentially monetize anything extra that we have to markets where other people could essentially buy those credits, whether it's in Michigan or other markets that our renewables qualify for. So, you know, we might have assets that are zero emitting that are greater in level than 15% even, but the excess credits go one of two places. They either go to markets where other people buy them kind of on wholesale from us, or they go to the individual customers that, like the city and the BPW's business, as well as a resident that wants to elect up to 100% of their power to come from renewable. Then instead of selling those extra credits to another area, we would retire those on the behalf of those individuals. And again, if enough demand gets created, then that causes us to have to go out and either secure new resources that are built that are creating it, or new credits. And again, the indirect of buying more credits is that ultimately it creates a situation where developers then start ultimately developing more renewables to meet that demand, you know, long term. So all of it has an impetus towards driving new renewables to be built.
And do any of those, all that renewable part of the portfolio, does that help to cancel out the parts of our portfolio like the coal plants? I mean, does that balance some of that out at all?
Well, as the demand grows for more renewables, it'll start to offset, you know, other types of resources that are producing. So it'll force us in a situation where either we're covering more of that power supply with renewable resources, which ultimately, you know, this goes into the carbon calculation, Nikki, is that our electric portfolio has a certain emission factor of carbon per megawatt hour or per kilowatt hour that's used. But that emission factor is going to be applied to the amount of amount that a customer is using that's not renewable themselves. So essentially, it does help our portfolio because your usage as an individual customer is going to be credited at 100% renewable as opposed to whatever the carbon intensity of our portfolio is. So in a way that helps, our community's carbon measurement by your individual selection.
And the other layer to that is people can be buying RECs not through the BPW, and it applies just the same way. I think a gap that we have is knowledge of
Yes.
who in town is buying RECs or offsets currently or not, right?
Right.
That was my question, Dave, and I don't know where it might be somewhere else in the opportunity matrix, but the RECs and offsets conversation to me, I know that they're different mechanisms, but they're sort of in a similar bucket where people can voluntarily, choose to pay a premium in order to participate in pushing the envelope. Should the REC purchasing mechanisms be included in the carbon offset one, or should we keep those separate?
Yeah, I looked at it. I guess it could be debatable where you want to put that. You could put that in offsets. Right now, it shows up as electric portfolio, and what it has here is as a strategy to increase the promotion of the elective renewable energy program. So, trying to increase that, trying to get the word out on it, try to really promote it better than what we have in the past to grow and get to some sort of target in terms of adoption.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that could probably show up under the offsets as well.
Yeah.
But the thing that's missing from here, I think, is, as you talked about the knowledge gap, one of the strategies that we could have would be to maybe put this down into the offsets, is to survey, our major primary manufacturers to find out to what level they are currently participating in offset programs today.
Yeah. And yeah, that's very appropriate. And I think, those two ideas in the opportunity matrix as they're written, to me, strikes me as like, well, I'm oversimplifying, but it's like, we need a task force, like figuring this out, right? Like every single angle on the whole thing, like how, like what's the options on how we pull it off? What are like, how creative and costly or not creative and not costly could our options be? Who in town's doing this stuff? I mean, I know for a fact that large employers are looking hard at doing this stuff right now. I just know that because of my business. And so there's a lot, there's a number of angles and a number of things there, I think, to unpack.
Yeah. That was actually the thing that caused me to want to get into the calculation a little bit, is just missing variables, understanding the size of the levers. And it occurred to me last week when we were talking about local sizable industrial employers that maybe are already participating, and we're not picking that up. We're not giving the city credit for that possibly.
Yeah.
Dave, on uptake rates too, that was the only comment I really had in this discussion was just, do you have that handy about what is the percentage of accounts that have taken up on this elective program?
Yeah, we have pretty good idea. Most of it, I know Ted and Amy can weigh in here. I think most of it has been residential, and it's maybe a few handfuls. I mean, it's not a lot. There's been some growing interest among some of our primary businesses, but I don't know that any of them has, other than obviously City Holland is a fairly large customer of ours, and we are of ourselves in terms of, our water utilities and our wastewater plants. But, as far as other bigger businesses, I don't know how many have really elected that at this point. Ted, do you have any additional information there?
A lot have reached out and asked us what the adder would be, but nobody has pulled the trigger and signed up yet.
Makes
The
me wonder.
city and BPW are by far the largest.
Badges and logos, and things like that they can market, we can help them market even locally.
Well, and what I think, yeah, for sure that so for residents, I think that the pricing, and this is unofficial anecdotal, but for residents, I think that pricing seems really reasonable. But for industrial, I don't know that a penny a kilowatt hour is, I know that they can purchase RECs cheaper than that other places.
Right.
So
Yeah. And the driver there, Brian, sorry, our RECs are constrained to the Michigan market.
right.
And that's part of the issue, is that when you look at the utilities value stream, there are either the Michigan market, which is actually the lower price market that we can sell some of our RECs in, some of our renewable generating assets are outside of Michigan. Even there's one in Indiana, there's another one in Michigan, but also in an area where it qualifies as a resource that could sell into New Jersey and Pennsylvania's REC markets. And, you know, where Michigan has had REC prices that have been pretty low, these other markets have had higher ones. And so we try to get the maximum value, even if we turn around and buy Michigan RECs to make up for the ones that we sell on the higher price market. You know, we try to make sure that, you know, we get the maximum value out of those RECs. And I think same thing with an industry. Yeah, they would choose to probably buy RECs if they're going to try to green their portfolio. They'll buy from the cheapest source possible, but still getting the same value in terms of an offset. And I totally understand that. You know, we have certain compliance obligations in Michigan that require that these be Michigan qualified RECs that we retire.
Yeah.
And so that's the reason that we look at it that way.
Yeah. And I wasn't suggesting they were priced the way they were for ill-intended reasons. I think what I was trying to get at was all the businesses that have reached out to Ted and inquired on the program, and if they haven't pulled the trigger, it doesn't mean they didn't pull a different trigger, is what I'm saying. You know, like if they were looking, they may have bought just something else cheaper. So that's back to the
True.
you know, B2B survey,
The knowledge gap that we have on that. Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
So we do have that conversation when we talk to them, and the problem with some of them is, you know, they don't have a person to go join the market and then talk to a broker and do the same, you know, so there's some work there that they have to do internally to do those things. But we have that conversation that, hey, it might be cheaper for you to do this. So we do talk about that.
Well, I think just one kind of comment on that, as somebody who is one of the handful of the residential customers that's in this, it's not an easy program to find and enroll in for residential customers. But I do think, like Brian said, especially for people like me, where it's $5 a month or something like that, to do it in kind of an easy, streamlined way, I think that's where you really have potential for that, where some of the, you know, other kind of buying RECs on the more open market makes sense for larger businesses and stuff. Like I would imagine if Hope College is going to do something like that, we're going to do it on the open market because we can get better prices. But for me, $5 a month, it's basically nothing. It's easy to, like, if you can make it easy, I think that's where the you know, businesses too, for smaller businesses, if you make it easy, that's where the advantage is.
Yeah. Would it be because of, you know, the utility bill is a heck of a marketing, it can be a great marketing vehicle because the thing keeps showing up every month. Would it be, I'm just literally thinking of this now, would it be weird to have the green pricing program for businesses basically catalyze a conversation, and then like hand it off to, can you partner with a broker and hand it off and just get people buying the RECs, and then even if it's not in the BPW, so we can be closer to achieving this goal? Like, is there a way to coordinate that if you guys are actually like top of, like, you're generating the conversation with people, but then, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can, there's certain things that we can do to help some of our larger businesses be aware of what it takes to get in there. And I think that's what Ted was alluding to, is that that's the kind of conversations that we have, that our program, eases some of the administrative burden, but if they're willing to put a little bit more effort on their end into qualifying to be able to be in a market where they can exchange with a broker, kind of doing the contracts with these brokers, so to speak, then they can achieve some better pricing, probably by eliminating our administrative step of, having that relationship with those brokers and doing that on their behalf. And I think that does make sense with some of the larger customers that we do have, for sure. And so that's part of that conversation.
Yeah, I almost think about it like the Trade Ally program with the rebates. It's like, oh, the rebates generate a conversation, and then you guys aren't like telling people what LED fixtures to put in their ceiling, but you're pointing towards a pre-approved Trade Ally list and say, hey, you're interested, you want to know more? Here's people that have jumped through the appropriate hoops and are qualified to help you take it home, sort of thing.
Yeah, so I want to capture that maybe under the promotion of the voluntary green program, voluntary electric renewable energy rate, and maybe just add another blurb in there, Brian, that says part of that is to develop possible educational programs for larger customers that may be able to interface with the market directly.
Yeah, I think that's we're getting into mapping the whole thing out a little bit, but I think these are all the things that a task force would exactly.
Well, I think it's a great objective. And I think at the strategy level, I think just saying it like that is probably a good level to say that it's not just promotional of our program, but looking at opportunities to educate those that can interface with the market directly to do so, to achieve the same thing at maybe a better price point for them.
I would agree that I think you really have two different buckets of customers that you're going to be dealing with. You're going to be dealing with like the little guy. And then I think, it's really just marketing the program that you have. But for bigger customers, I think something more interfacing with the larger market would make more sense.
Yeah. And Dave,
so I'm going to be the process cheerleader for all of you guys right now, and not like keep it going too. But what you're doing right now is really exactly, kind of what we're trying to set up, right? So we have the opportunity matrix. So Brian, I don't think you're digging in too much. You're digging in just the right amount to kind of talk about, okay, what's a strategy maybe that we want to look at? And just because you're talking about it today doesn't mean that at the end, when we go through all of the opportunity matrix and the lever possibilities, but then you don't have to remember back 3 months ago. So the tweaks that you're doing right now that Dave is typing into the opportunity matrix is absolutely perfect, right? Because it's developing your work and you're saying, hey, this. And you're giving staff direction of, hey, we liked this. No, we didn't like this. This is a high opportunity. This kind of reserved for another day. So this is absolutely perfect, guys.
Cool. One more thought on the residential side too. Would you say, Dave, I mean, it sounds like there's a small uptake, but it just feels like one of those things, once a resident has signed up, it's got to be really sticky. Like it's got to be one of those things. I can't imagine anybody, you just forget about it. Really, your bill just starts rolling in, and the hard part is onboarding, right? And getting people bought in to sign up, but then the retention has to be off the charts if I were to guess. So is there any way to incentivize to sign up, with 3 months covered of your first 3 months signing up for green, or, any kind of retail oriented thinking, that calls to action, giveaways, I mean, things like that? Or is that not?
Well, I think again, the strategy point here, Boyd, in terms of that we want to increase promotion of it, is the strategy level, what the specific efforts are that we might do. Again, this task force that takes your recommendations and starts going in implementation, they're going to do that. But I agree with you that the uptake and the origination of that with a new customer is really the toughest thing. We tend to have, good performance, I think, of people that are staying with the program. So So again, I don't know if, again, what Keith just said in terms of finding the right point in terms of where this group is working versus kind of getting into the how. The what we want to achieve is the additional promotion and uptake of our residential level participation in our elective renewable energy program. The how it gets done, I think, again, that's where the steering committee and their teams start doing those work, to actually implement the actual program to achieve it, Boyd. So I think your point's well taken. I just don't know if that's the level that this committee needs to define it down to, but a strategy of ensuring that we get significant increase of participation in our elective renewable energy program is definitely in line with a proper strategy level.
Dave, to your point,
sign up and get a free frozen yogurt at Peach Wave.
I was going to say that too, but yeah.
Dave,
can I then unsign up and then re-sign up?
Dave, you've got. Oh, could you go back to the?
Oh, I'm sorry. Certainly.
The opportunity.
Certainly.
Just wordsmithing, but where on the 3 to 5 year goal where it says increased promotion of the elective renewable energy program, could we put in there increase the promotion and participation in the elective?
Right. Sure.
Because you can promote, but if you don't get the participation, you haven't achieved your objective.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, we want the end result to be the uptake.
Yeah. What's our goal?
Yeah.
So do you think, Dave, that it's too, well, whatever, if you don't think it's too granular, then I definitely think we need to have some sort of, not just one time, but ongoing mechanism for businesses to report whether they're participating in offsets and renewable energy credits outside of whatever programs we may or may not have as a BPW or city. Like, I don't know what kind of client feedback loop you'd create, but we need to, if the whole point is getting the metric number down, we need to know if people are doing offsets and recs without our knowledge, right? Like that's literally the whole point. So we need to know that. So however you want to capture that needs to be in there. I got to say, it's a little disappointing to know how many people are on the Holland Climate Collaborative and how few people are signed up for the green tariff.
Uh-oh.
I don't know if I should publicly call that out, but I just did. So there's a lot of advocacy. Time to throw $5 at it, folks.
Phones are ringing.
Hey, that's good.
It's hard to find. I'll give them that, but it's worth it.
That's for Don and Peter. That's my little nudge for those guys.
I'm going to sign up. I didn't know about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I guess I would say just call 355-1500 and talk to customer service, and it's very easy to sign up.
Yeah.
But I would agree that, part of that promotion is there are some things that we can do better, I think, to make it more obvious and streamlined that it's available. I appreciate Jeff's comments on that. But yeah, the easiest way as your local, hometown utility, picking up that phone and talking to our customer service reps will help you get it into your system and get you on the program right away.
And make sure they're ready for that question, just like they should be ready for the question about your car charger too.
Yes.
If they are not always ready.
Yeah, and there's a link that Amy, thank you, Amy, just posted to the chat box there if anybody wants to link it directly. So.
Yeah, I think Jeff's point is well articulated by way of it being described as easy involving picking up the phone. I think that in and of itself describes that it's not easy.
Yeah. Well, I found it because I was enrolled in a similar program when we lived in Denver. So then I spent, when we first moved here, I spent a half hour poking around and was like, I found it and found a similar type of program. But had I not known that a program like this existed in some places, it wouldn't have been obvious to me that it existed here.
Yeah. And people under 30 don't pick up the phone and call anything.
No, I did it online. I didn't call.
Yeah, they don't use the phone for a phone.
That's correct. Thank you, Tim.
Call that the strong thumb generation.
That's
Yeah.
right. That's right.
That's
Oh.
for sure.
That's good. Cool.
And one more
Anything else
question
to
on
add to the
the,
opportunity matrix.
Up right now.
PJ?
One more question on the offsets and the recs. You made mention of the task force, which will be formed, I would assume, in the future to survey Holland area businesses. Would we not call out to our benchmarking effort that's looking at other like-kind communities to investigate what information we could get from them as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, this list that we're creating here is a preliminary list. This is not the last time that we can look at any of these strategies underneath the 3 to 5 year window and these 5 levers. My thought is that let's get these, while the education is fresh in everybody's mind, let's at least revisit the lever from a strategy standpoint and make sure we have a preliminary list. And then near the end of the 5 levers of, when we bring educational topic to you, we still got to cover transportation, education, and building energy consumption. And so when we bring those forward and get done with that, there's going to be public engagement yet. And then by that time, Joe, who's also on the line here to update you today, will be able to give you better information too on the benchmarking and what other communities are doing. And that might supplement that list too. So the idea is that we're kind of funneling down to a set of recommendations for strategies for city council to consider. And I totally agree with you, PJ. I think that benchmarking part of it is going to be part of what we're going to want to check in against to make sure that we're not missing something that is a really good idea that other communities are employing.
Yeah. Really good.
Good.
Any other final comments on the offsets and the opportunity matrix? Good discussion, everyone. Okay. Great. Well, then that's good stuff. I think that we'll be circling back on that stuff as we finalize the report for sure. And yeah, so Andrew is going to talk to us about the carbon footprint calculation methodology. I don't know if Dave or Keith wants to tee this up anymore. Otherwise,
just say, appreciate Andrew being here today. Andrew is in our operations department in the planning engineering area of our organization. And Andrew's been very instrumental over the last several years, really, working with community, putting together our submissions on our carbon calculation. And so he knows all that goes into that number, where that 19 metric tons per capita is coming from and some of the assumptions that are involved with it. So he's made this presentation before in a certain way to the Living Sustainably Along the Lakeshore series at the library earlier this year, but asked him to kind of tweak it for this group a little bit to make sure we could really understand what's behind these things. And so he's available to you to answer any questions after he goes through it. And I just really appreciate Andrew being here. So Andrew, I'll turn it over to you and it's all yours.
All right. Thanks, Dave. So yeah, as Dave mentioned, this is a version of what was presented to the Living Sustainably Along the Lakeshore group last fall, and also the CEP steering committee last March. So not a lot of new numbers here necessarily, or really not any new numbers, but getting a lot more into the details of the how and these numbers were calculated, which I think will be a lot of interest to you folks. So diving into it here with a quick overview, just a background of the calculations and how they've been conducted, but then getting into the details of the greenhouse gas in terms of the math, the geography we're working with, and then some of the tools that we have to do that calculation, and then some specific notes by sector. So industrial, commercial, residential that I think are of interest. So a little bit on the background, giving my caveat up front, I've been with the board for 6 years, but that does not include going back to 2010. So I was not involved with the original CEP. So there are some good appendices in that report at the back that describe some of their calculation methodologies, but I can't really answer specific questions on how certain things were calculated back in 2010. And because of that, when we were first talking about doing an update to the calculations, we realized we need to have a way to kind of verify for ourselves as we move forward what this number, this metric tons per capita number is, because Garforth is not on staff. So this was our effort. Started back in 2018. We thought, well, let's first start with recreating the 2010 calculation. So that was myself and Michelle Gibbs and Aaron Thalenwood with the city, kind of as a team, kind of trying to take the data that we could get from 2010 to kind of piece together and try and get the same number Garforth did with our own calculation approach. And long story short, we were able to do that almost exactly to the 24 metric tons per capita. A little bit of that was good fortune, which I'll comment on, but we did recreate that number. So we had some confidence that going forward, we could kind of update the number as new data came in as the years went along. So we did that, the calculation for 2010, and then also did it that same year with 2015 data. And that was when we got to the 22 metric tons per capita number. 2015 was noteworthy specifically because it was before HEP was online, Holland Energy Park, but also a good just 5-year kind of mile marker from the 2010 report. So that was the significance of that year. The most recent calculation we've done was conducted in 2020 with 2018 data. So that was the new, that's where we got the 19 metric tons per capita number, which is important because it is post HEP being online. So you saw the savings in the emission factor, which I'll talk about momentarily. So this is an unofficial kind of a 2-year update process, only because it is, it's an undertaking to collect this data. The processing of it has been, the efficiency of that has improved as we've done it 3 times now, but it is data from a lot of different sources and a lot of double and triple checking. So at this point, it's every 2 years, but that can be modified as needed as we decide going forward. This is the basic math. There's not a lot to it when you look at it just on its face, but there's a lot of different layers underneath this. So your amount you're emitting is based on your amount you consume times an emission factor. So what does that really mean? So looking at metered totals like kilowatt hours from our BPW electric customers and therms of gas purchased from SEMCO customers, or vehicle miles traveled, you're taking that amount of stuff and multiplying it times your emissions per unit of stuff. And so the emission factor is coming from different sources, just like the amount consumed is coming from different sources. So this tons per kilowatt, or tons of carbon dioxide, and that little E stands for equivalent. So that's when you're emitting not just carbon dioxide, but methane and nitrous oxide specifically in this calculation. That's kind of the standard. When you see CO2e, that's what it's referring to as those 3 main pollutants. So we're doing calculations behind the scene to determine what that emission factor is specifically for our utility. That's not a number you can get from a website that's updated constantly. You have to do that calculation in-house. So that is taking into account our renewable generation, our stake in coal burning plants in the other part of the state, but also things like Holland Energy Park. So that number changes as our energy mix changes from year to year, sometimes more than others, but that's a fluid number. And then obviously you multiply the 2 together and the units cancel out. So you get tons of CO2 from burning or from generation of electricity. You add that same calculation up with the similar number from burning of gas, vehicle miles, and you end up with a total, which you divide by the city's population to get that magic 24, 22, 19 metric tons per capita. So that's really the guts of the calculation right there. It's just the devil's in the details, obviously, of where you get those numbers and how trustworthy they are.
Mm-hmm.
So as I mentioned before, the data is from various internal and external sources. And it's a lot of these cases, it's in big data sets, specifically some of the transportation data. So it doesn't get updated very frequently. For the 2018 calculation, for example, that, as I mentioned, was done in 2020, we had to use 2015 vehicle miles traveled data because that was not a data set that was updated as regularly as we would have hoped. So we run into that in a couple of places where you don't always have the data up to date without waiting at least some number of months after what you'd normally want to calculate. So I probably wouldn't have good calendar year 2020 data for a couple months yet on some of these things we need to use to calculate this. But an important note here on the math that I wanted to just mention was that we did make, as I said, we were able to confirm the CEP numbers, but we've since made some adjustments. One of those, very obviously timely with the discussion just preceding this, was that we are now accounting for those voluntary green program purchases from customers that are there. I will say it's about 0.01% of the emissions for the city is currently being deducted because of those purchases right now. So it is not much, but it is included. So if you go out there and you're buying it, you are currently contributing to the solution. Similarly with EVs, those were not specifically accounted for in the CEP calculation for obvious reasons. 2010 was a little bit ahead of the curve for that. And we are still a little bit ahead of the curve, but we are accounting for EVs in our transportation emissions calculation by simply deducting the per vehicle miles traveled. So kind of like the homes purchasing green energy with RECs, you can assume that if you're driving a green vehicle, you're not getting double counted, because theoretically, if you're charging at home, green or not, we're already counting those emissions. So you're not double counting for the miles you're traveling. But again, a small piece of the pie right now. We're just trying to kind of figure out how to do these calculations and these tweaks before we get into bigger numbers and a bigger impact.
Right. So Andrew, real quick on that, I guess, just to be clear on that first sub-bullet there about the EVs. So deducting it from the registry of amount of vehicles traveled in the state or in the city doesn't mean that all EVs have no carbon responsibility at all. Correct. What it means is that the actual consumption data, instead of being at the electric vehicle level or the vehicle level, is really being recorded for the purposes of doing the greenhouse gas calculation at wherever the charging is taking place. So if there's a charger in the home or in the city somewhere, that's part of the data set on the electricity consumption, and therefore the electric factor is applied to that, and there still is some carbon responsibility that the EVs have.
Correct. It would be much harder to go back into the sales data and say these specific kilowatt hours were used to charge a vehicle, therefore we're deducting them from here. It's a much easier approximation to make to just say those vehicle miles were not traveled on the road as if they didn't exist. So you would need to be an EV owner who also bought RECs to be truly off the grid from a vehicle emissions perspective. That's right.
Thank you.
So the GHG geography is pretty obvious here, but a lot of this data doesn't comply to our city boundaries. We found out pretty quickly. So there is a little bit of behind the scenes GIS mapping analysis that has to be done just to kind of trim the data to the boundary that we're working with. Obviously, SEMCO doesn't stop at city limits. Our service area doesn't stop at city limits. So there's things that are accounted for there. And that's actually the easier stuff. Some of the other kind of modifications we made to the CEP's process, or at least ones we couldn't tell if they were done or not. Things like the city's water treatment plant, which is out by Tunnel Park on the north side, obviously outside of city limits, but it's a sizable electric user, but it uses power from consumers' energy. They are not in Holland BPW's service area, but they are serving the residents of Holland. So what we did was prorate the metered electric usage from the water plant based on how much water the city of Holland uses as a fraction of the total water sales of the plant. So that ends up being about 50% of the electric load of the plant is attributable to City of Holland demands. Similarly with the wastewater or the reclamation facility, it's serving a population larger than the city, even though all of its electric demand is showing up in our record. It's kind of the reverse. So we're deducting the piece that's not serving Holland. So in that case, about a third of the plant's demand is City of Holland flows for the reclamation facility. So they seem like minor tweaks, but again, that's just ways to try and make it as accurate as possible. So it's reflecting the true City of Holland contribution. Transportation, this will be a theme, is kind of the fuzziest of the categories, which we'll get into just because it's a whole lot harder to get accurate, precise data on how people are using their vehicles. As far as we can understand it from the data we've gotten from the state, the vehicle miles traveled data that we have is for miles that are traveled within city limits. So if you drive your car from City Hall to Grand Rapids, we will capture a few miles of that, supposedly, based on the data we get from the state, but it will not capture people who are commuting back and forth every day to destinations beyond the city. In a perfect world, all the jurisdictions between here and Grand Rapids would be doing some similar calculation. We would all be ultimately calculating the right number of miles traveled for each of those segments of that trip and all accounting for it without double counting, but that's obviously a tricky one to figure out. So then the tools we're actually using to do the calculation, and I should say, if anyone's got questions, feel free to jump in as we go too. I don't want to go all the way till the end, but you might have heard people mention ICLEI or ClearPath potentially. Whenever you hear someone say that, I want you to picture TurboTax because it's not that this is the calculate, or this is not the group, or in this case, the ClearPath software that is doing the calculation for us. It's a calculator you can kind of use to put in all of the inputs that you have. But at that point, once you've got the inputs, you've basically done your taxes already. And you could just put them in your 1040 form, or in this case, into Excel, and hopefully get the same result. So while we do have a subscription with ICLEI and they have a staff that backs that up, so if we have a question of how should we be applying this transportation factor, they have prompt answers. They can say, oh yeah, the communities we work with, we generally recommend you approach the calculation this way. And then they have the ClearPath tool, which you put in your numbers of kilowatt hours sold, but then you have to put in your emission factor. And then it does that very simple multiplication problem I showed on the earlier slide. So the tool is not as powerful as the data that you have to put into it. So at that point, like I said, you're kind of doing you're crunching your numbers yourself. But for keeping track from year to year, it's a very good tool, good way to summarize, but it's not a big computing engine behind the scenes doing anything we can't do ourselves.
Just a quick question going back on transportation. Are you picking up diesel, different fuel type vehicles, I guess, in the overall miles? Is it segmented, or is it, are there layers of assumption?
Yeah, and I'll get in a little bit in the details on the different segments, but yes, there is it's based on state level data, or I guess it is now we have more, I think it's Ottawa County data on the breakdown of vehicle types. And the Secretary of State has their own categorizations for those, but they fall into pretty broad categories. So you're getting gas, passenger vehicles, and light trucks. And then you're also getting the diesel large trucks. And there's a couple different subcategories there, but you are differentiating traditional gasoline and diesel.
Okay.
And then the miles per gallon for that sub fleet of vehicles, which then can all be averaged together to give you a fleet wide miles per gallon average.
What about other types like recreation vehicles, boating, lawn mowing, all those small engine stuff? Is anything like that in here at all?
We were interested in some of the small engine stuff, but we're unable to find any data on it. That's one that would be interesting to throw in, but at this point, we just don't have the numbers on either the average emissions per lawnmower or the number of lawnmowers in use or how much they're in use. There's just a lot of unknowns there. Obviously, they're emitting, but in terms of an apples to apples to the CEP, those weren't included before or even guessed at before, so we haven't up to this point.
Okay.
But for a holistic accounting, yeah, you'd have some of those numbers figured out.
In recreation vehicles?
We have some stats from the state, I think, on the number of registered ones, but similarly, we just don't have good emissions data
Mhm.
So you could assume they're all like every ATV is like a motorcycle, or you could assume every ATV is like a sedan or somewhere in between, but just don't have the data to say one way or another at this point.
And boating, Coast Guard, they don't provide anything or registrations on boats. Nothing.
No, we the only kind of non-vehicle, non-car truck data we did collect was from the airport, just out of curiosity, and because we had staff that obviously support the airport operations, and it ended up being negligible. And we also had the same problem of defining what fraction of those gallons of aviation fuel were attributable to the city limits. You're in the air for a few seconds and you're gone, but does that mean your whole trip is because of the city of Holland, or?
Yeah.
We encourage the boats to hang to the northern coastline.
Right. So it's challenging. Once you pick a way to do it, you can make it reproducible. That's fine.
Yeah.
It's just defining what your fence is.
Sure.
Yep.
And Andrew, just real quickly, as I'm learning, every time that we talk about this too.
Yeah.
This was a really helpful screen for me. And tell me if I understand part of this correctly too. And I don't know if you're going to talk about this later, but we're getting better at doing the calculations each time we do it too, even within the things that we kind of had a so-called baseline for originally. So it's not just, ICLEI is a great supporter and it's a great model, but each and every time we're doing more Excel 2016 work to get better data, right? But then that's also interesting, right? Because then we're also kind of going back and maybe we had a little bit, it's on the margins, right? But a little bit of the wrong baseline to begin with as we get better at our own modeling. Do I have that correct?
Yep, that's exactly right. So when you go into, for example, you go into ICLEI's ClearPath tool, it's not prompting me to deduct the number of EV miles, or it's not prompting me to deduct the number of voluntary green program customers. We just are realizing as we're going through this, we're not accounting for this, but we have the data. We could be accounting for this. So let's put it in our spreadsheet so we know that once we do this, we can do these tweaks afterwards.
Yeah.
So in a perfect world, we should be getting essentially the same number out of TurboTax as your 1040 instructions. But you don't know that you're not prompted to look for certain things in TurboTax that you might be in if you read the full instructions, hence the analogy. So, Yep. So then I've got one slide left for each of the different categories, just on some interesting notes on how we calculate them. Some of them are pretty straightforward, but just shown here in order of percent of the pie that they occupy as of the 2018 calculation. Just give you a moment to just digest. I didn't put the pie chart in there, but so for industrial energy, this is just for industrial customers of BPW and SEMCO. It's about as straightforward as it comes from the different categories, because it really is just metered kilowatt hours times the electric emission factor and metered therms times the gas emission factor. Something I should have noted before on the gas emission factor is that pretty much no matter where you go, well, not pretty much, definitely, no matter where you go in the country burning natural gas, it's emitting the same amount. There's not clean natural gas. There might be more efficient ways to burn it, so you're burning less, but when you burn that unit of gas, you're emitting what you emit. Unlike the electric emission factor, which we've reduced almost 50% since 2010 with switching to a more natural gas heavy mix away from coal, we can drive that number down ourselves. We can't drive the number for the gas emission factor down. Well, I shouldn't say we can't. There might be some level of brilliant technological breakthrough out there that will be coming soon, but as far as I know, this number is what it is, and it is what it was in 2010 and will be what it is in 2030. So when you're burning gas, you're emitting. So just something to note as we go through these different categories. A big asterisk from what we discovered doing this calculation for 2010 was that Semco has a category of customers they call transport customers, which are actually some of their largest customers who actually buy gas wholesale and just have it use Semco's lines to get it to their facilities. And when we included these, which it didn't appear based on the totals, again, we kind of were able to recreate the metered totals they'd used in the CEP. This was missing. So when we included it back in, it's responsible for more than 1/10 of the city's emissions. So obviously a big chunk.
Andrew, I actually had that written down as a question to follow up with you around the transport customers. So that was not in the original calculation. Wow,
no, it was one of those where we kind of had the 2010 total gas. We could tell from, again, just looking through the appendices and things where they were accounting for emissions. And when we put our numbers in, we said, well, if we take transport out, our numbers essentially match.
Wow.
But when we add it back in, and it was one of those where, I mean, at the time we were doing the first calculation, I didn't know what a transport customer was.
Sure.
It was just from reaching out to Semco. They just said, the person we happened to find who had the data said, do you want the transport data?
Right.
What's the transport data?
Yeah.
And that happens a few of these times on the transportation stuff too. It's like, well, what is that data that you're offering? So
if you recall, earlier we talked about the changes between 2010 and 2018, and I talked about how natural gas had gone up pretty significantly, especially in the industrial sector. And I attributed a lot of that to industrial growth. And I think some of it can be cited as being industrial growth. But this is a big piece too. Just an overall miss, in the community energy plan, where this particular sector should have probably been higher, and the 24 metric tons would have been influenced up if the transport customers were involved. As we'll talk about, fortunately, this fortuitous part, Andrew will talk about here in a little bit, taking away from maybe another sector, but in the natural gas, this is an explanation why some of it is increased, not all the reason, but for why some of it is increased between the two dates.
And for people that don't know, so I'm just going to say it because I'm pretty good at explaining things to a kindergartner because that's my level of understanding on this stuff. But so this actually pops up all the time on, if you have that app, the neighborhood app, people, what's that app called that, I don't know what it's called, some neighborhood thing. And people always comment like, someone's knocking on people's doors, selling gas, and they're offering me a great rate. And they think it's like they think it's a scam. And so natural gas, if you don't know, natural gas is totally deregulated in the state, residential, commercial, industrial, which means anybody, your home, your business, however big, however small, can buy the gas, the commodity, from anybody who sells it. So similar to like the RECs and the offsets, there's like brokers and marketers for so it functions similarly. So Semco has very good natural gas rates. So it's very rare in fact, in residence, you should not buy your gas right now from anybody but Semco. They have really good rates. But for large users like the hospital, the aquatic center, Padnos, a bunch of places, big volume, you can buy transport, which is exactly like Andrew described, which is you're not buying it from Semco, they're piping it in over Semco or potentially outside of Semco, or it's coming through Semco's distribution, but it's bought on from some other source. And
Brian, if I can jump in on that, just to kind of add a little clarity to the deregulated part is really on the supply of as you said, the gas itself. Yeah. The distribution lines are still regulated, and there's a rate that the Public Service Commission gives Semco the ability to recover on the distribution of that natural gas to recover the lines. Mm-hmm. So what ends up happening is Semco will buy and put into storage and have a little bit of an averaging. Their rate's probably going to be a little more stable over time. And that means there'll be times where the spot market for natural gas is lower. And so somebody can come in at that time and say, hey, Semco's average price is here and the spot market is down here. You want to buy from me? And then they hope that you don't check in with them again when the market goes back up, to a higher level. So, but those that do have the staffs to really sort of keep up on it, and that's why it's like 11%. There are some larger users in town that do their own hedging programs, do their own buying programs, and then they can kind of buy from different providers as they see it fitting their need in their portfolio.
Yeah, a lot of residents think it's a weird scam, and it's actually it's totally legal to buy your gas from other places. But the the tough part is exactly like what Dave said. The offer they'll give you is like, for the first month, we guarantee will be this much less than whatever Semco is charging. And then people don't read any of the fine print, and then they end up paying massive premiums, and anyways, it can be pretty predatory. Not Semco, these are just like random places out there. But anyway, so yeah, but so that was not, so none of the transport gas was factored back in 2010.
Does not appear so.
Yeah, that's a big reorient for everybody associated with this. I mean, that number, that 24 was not where we were starting in 2010, if that's true.
Right.
It wouldn't be true except for something that's coming later.
Okay, fair enough.
Commercial energy, same idea. The only caveat I noted here with the gas customer classifications was that Semco doesn't use commercial and industrial. They have different tiers of customers. So for simplicity's sake, every year that we have done the calculation, we've called the transport customers industrial, and their GS 1, 2, and 3 categories commercial. So if it matters, we can dive into more parsing out of who is exactly considered what, but it's all the same in the total.
Andrew, how do you collect the transport information?
They just give it to us in a one-line number. It's not broken out by number of transport customers or any names of who they are. It's just, here's what we sold in this whatever unit of time. So it's been calendar year.
Okay.
Yeah,
Semco's
participation
number. They have the total number of customers, but it's not anything more than that.
Semco's participation with us is really based upon the fact that it's at a very macro level. If we started getting very granular about it, then we would need to have releases from individual customers to share that data. So they provide everything on a pretty high level.
Yeah.
Just as a sidebar, when we do the feedback loop on especially the 10 major industrial clients, asking them about if they're buying RECs or carbon offsets or anything like that, like this should be, we should just be asking this. I don't know if they want to tell us or not, but I don't think that they would be secretive about it. It should just be on the list of questions. Go ahead, Andrew. Sorry. Thanks, bud.
That's fine. Residential energy is, again, just building energy. So electricity and gas. But this is where I mentioned that we've just, as of the 2018 calculation, we've started deducting the kilowatt hour impact of the voluntary green program or elective renewable program that you were talking about before. So, and the net impact of that in 2018, before City Hall and some other city facilities have started subscribing, was 0.01%. And I believe that was something like 3 dozen homes, was roughly what that participation was in 2018. So 16% as a sector.
Mm-hmm.
Transportation at about 12%. Like I said, this was a little bit of the calculations. It's more complex, but it's still not that bad. There's just one extra step because you have vehicle miles traveled data, and you have to divide by that kind of fleet average miles per gallon fuel emission standard, or not standard, fuel emission actuality based on the vehicles in the fleet.
Mm-hmm.
And that number comes from EPA. it self-populates into ICLEI's calculation tool, so we don't have to go out and find that number. It would be relatively easy to find anyway, but that's one that kind of lags a few years. It hasn't moved much since we've started these calculations. I think between 2015 and 2018, it only moved a few tenths of a point. And we're talking like the mid 25s for miles per gallon. And it only inched down a little bit. And as you always hear, people are buying more SUVs and trucks anyway, so it's not flying down anytime soon.
Yeah.
And similarly, VMT doesn't seem to change much. I don't know how they calculate it. This would be one I'd like to learn more about, but it would be interesting to see what it is for 2020, but which would be our next calculation year, because theoretically you could have less vehicle miles being traveled from people not commuting, but maybe they're making more local trips. So I don't know how that's getting accounted for. But so the only way to really drive this number down is to get people to drive less, or as we were talking about before, with being able to offset an EV's contributions. But we're starting with a relatively small piece of the pie. In other communities, from what we've heard from ICLEI, transportation is a bigger percent. But I think part of that's because we have such a large industrial and commercial sector for our city size. So it's not necessarily people are driving less already in Holland. It's just their impact of their driving doesn't weigh as heavily on the overall picture.
Mm-hmm.
But that was just a little insight from ICLEI when they were reviewing our last calculation.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Andrew. I've never thought of it that way, right? It's kind of like, we're only so many square miles, right? So this is one of those areas where, because we're so industrialized, we know that it hurts us in some areas, but that's a real simple, easy way to envision how, because a certain percentage of those square miles is industrial, then we don't have residential people living in those areas. So our transportation VMT actually is lower than maybe other communities. So I've never heard that before. That's a real simple way to explain and understand that.
Yeah, and this is the other note I have here is what Dave was hyping before for me, was that this is the other big one, along with the transport data for the 2010 calculation, that we noticed that we made a big change in. Again, trying to read back the notes in the 2010 CEP, it sounded like what they did was they had Ottawa County VMT data, and they tried to estimate City of Holland using probably a population proxy, like a representative share of that VMT based on population. But for whatever reason, in recent years, we've been able to get City of Holland specific VMT, and it was noticeably less. In this case, almost 50%. It was almost, a third less. The original was 50% higher than what they'd used in the CEP. So once you take that into consideration, it just so happened to almost neglect or offset the transport gas correction from before. So
we're still at 24, but for different reasons in
Right.
terms of the starting point.
Yeah.
The key, the gut punch here for me a little bit is that, I saw a lot more potential in the transportation sector from a carbon perspective under the initial CEP is like 20+% of the pie. And I think, it's a pretty high level when you look at it on a state of Michigan wide basis, EVs are still a pretty significant portion. But here now what this has done is, brought it down to 12%. It's still meaningful, but, harder to see the value proposition maybe in terms of large investments on a community basis compared to other strategies potentially. But it is still significant, but a lot less significant than maybe it was originally identified to be in the 2010 data.
On the flip side, though, it's continued to put a higher concentration into a smaller number of stakeholders in terms of where the next real impact is. It just circles back to industrial, commercial businesses are that much more, the opportunity to get our arms around here quickly, I think. And And then the other factor I think that needs to be we've talked about this a few times, but I think the other factor that needs to be played into that is production volumes from then until now relative to capita and employees is like, you can't, you know, we just need to be cognizant of like, it's not always bad to use more energy. If your business is 5 times as much and we're employing 5 times as many people in town, you know, like it, you know, this, you know, there's just another layer that feeds into that, I feel like.
Yeah, and that was, I didn't include it here, but back in the presentation to Living Sustainably group last fall, I had just some figures on the different sectors and how they had, in all cases, except for residential electricity, used more than they did in terms of number of units, so kilowatt hours or therms, and they did in 2010. And just because of our improvements in emission factor, that actually meant that their emissions actually went down for at least for the electric side. Gas went up proportionally with their usage because you can't change the emission factor again for gas. But so you could have industrial customers using more but emitting less in that time span because we got cleaner per kilowatt hour, but that can only take you so far.
And vehicles, I mean, you may say it's not worth it as much, or you know, it didn't have the importance that you thought of investing in it. It's a very visible part, and it may be a good, you know, for marketing or for visibility for people's awareness. You know, it does that.
And
yeah, and we're going to talk, I think, a lot more detail about transportation when we get to that lever. You know, one of the things I will say about transportation too, it kind of goes back to the principles of the CEP in a way, in that looking at, if you don't need to use it, don't. And then how can you make your systems as efficient as possible before you consider the fuel source involved? And I think there again, you know, this whole mobility question, you know, as a community, you know, how do we improve the mobility situation to begin with? How do we make our system as efficient as possible? Because I agree in terms of health of community, of a number of different factors, you know, look at goals of, you know, getting workers to where their employment is, and, you know, solving a lot of other issues. You know, transportation is more than just a greenhouse gas issue for a community. But working on that, there's some real opportunities there. I didn't mean to diminish it. I just was hoping that, you know, there was more than what there ended up being, I think. But your point's well taken, Nikki.
Yeah, and just to reiterate too, that's their transportation impact of people driving their vehicles within city limits, as far as we can tell. So people who drive well beyond that would stand to have, I mean, from a global perspective, are reducing their emissions more by cleaning that up if they can. So
there's just
Andrew, to your knowledge, in that data, there's no exclusions like busing, for example, school buses, capturing semi trucks coming in and out to our factories, things like that. It's theoretically, it's all in.
Theoretically, it's all in. Yeah, it's really tough to dissect it though. It's not one we've been able to get much clarity on, but it looks like it's all in because there is data for buses, there's data for multiple sizes of trucks. But at the end of the day, you have a VMT number and just got to go with it, I guess.
Yeah, I guess just one brief comment on the vehicle transportation aspect of this. So I think greenhouse gases are one piece of that pie. Carbon dioxide from the tailpipe, right? So you have obviously then the externalities of just particulate pollution from that, which, like, from just a community standpoint, is a larger health problem than the carbon dioxide. Not that the carbon dioxide is not a problem, but for like local air quality, that's obviously the bigger aspect of that. Shifting to electric, you reduce that. And I think there, you know, from like gas stations and stuff, there's a lot of emissions and of just gas evaporating at the fuel pump and stuff, which is not taken into account just from tailpipe emissions. So I think there is a pretty significant non-carbon dioxide aspects to it on top of the carbon dioxide aspect to it. So I just think, right, I mean, we're talking about the entire impact of systems like that. And I think there is certainly, there's some advantage for BPW and for the city because you're shifting stuff from gasoline to electricity, which then obviously then you're on the city's infrastructure too.
Yeah, I mean, dollars are staying local. There's a lot of different, aspects to that. And you're right. I mean, volatile organic compounds are the precursor to ozone formation. And that's, also an issue in our area. So that, yeah, there's a lot of, and actually your points there kind of prompted me to ask a question that I don't know the answer to, Andrew. Do fugitive methane emissions become part of this calculation at all?
Not as we've done them.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. So that's, I mean, for the like VOCs and stuff, that's also obviously part of the greenhouse gas pie is some of these other things that we're probably not taking into account by just taking into account carbon dioxide.
Yep. Yeah, very good point.
Which is why I think, Jeff, that's still one of the opportunity matrix levers that we still have some education to do and develop some, like, okay, so what are strategies around those areas? So points well made.
Just wrapping up here with the last two sectors. Water and wastewater is broken out just because that's a default in ICLEI's calculation tool. I'm guessing for smaller communities where that's a bigger impact. So I've already talked about how we break it down on a prorated basis. So again, it only ends up being 1%, but it's really technically could be in the commercial and industrial sector. And then solid waste was just something we got some data on from Republic this last calculation cycle. So for 2018, and this is when we actually do rely on ICLEI's math because we don't have a good way of approximating it, but basically we're getting a tonnage of waste hauled by Republic to the landfill, and there's some emission factors provided by ICLEI for what the decomposition of that waste is in a landfill with methane collection. And that's about all we can do with that number. So it ends up being not much again in the total pie, but it is included, which was not part of the 2010 calculation.
Andrew, does anything matter on that, given the fact that Republic hauls to Eastmanville and they have not only methane collection, but they have generators that are burning that methane for electricity production, or doesn't that?
We have not tried to account for that yet.
Okay.
There's not, again, back to the TurboTax, there's no prompt
Okay.
that said, what if they do this? It was just, do they have methane collection? So we could go into it and figure out some more details there, but we have not tried that yet.
And this is, again, is one that was not included in the 2010 pie, right?
Right.
Okay.
And that's all I have. So any other questions, I'd be happy to stick around for a while and answer anything, but I can also be reached via email too if you think of questions after the fact, and obviously I can help Dave answer any of those afterwards.
Thank you. Nothing's very simple, is it?
No.
I think, thank you, Andrew. Yeah, that's what I'd hope to see, that there's a lot of thinking, there's some assumptions, there's certain reliance on data, there's data lags, there's all that reality behind this. I think coming out of it, it's still one of the levers that's not there is about carbon offset calculation, RAC calculations. They're not, you work with what you have, and it's being looked at for years now. It's being refined and looked at, and that's a big takeaway for me.
Yeah, if I had data on which industrial customers were buying RECs, it'd be a very quick adjustment to make to the totals. It wouldn't take much. I just need to have the numbers.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, just need the data.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I think
Thank you,
that and that again gets back to like the production volumes are again really interesting related to, so your energy cost per widget produced, if you're an industry, is something you don't mind energy going up if business is going up and production's going up. What you'd like to see is your energy cost per, part you make staying flat or going down, right? Like that's really what you're looking at. And so if you've got a REC and offset program, total purchasing of energy can go up, but the relative cost per part, if that's going down, it's not as painful to jump in on a REC or an offset program on top of what you're paying per part, because you're seeing that go down because of efficiency and other, good pricing from the BPW and all that other good stuff. So it's just, it's a very concentrated group of people that make up a huge, 43% of the whole thing. And then commercial is not that much, there's more, but it's still a relatively small amount of people versus 35,000 residents, right? So it's exciting. I get excited about that just because the standpoint of can we make good improvement? This is, in the short term, there's some obvious places to focus. Great. Any other questions for Andrew?
Thank you, Andrew.
Thanks, everybody.
Awesome. Cool. Well, we've got Joe back with us to give us a little mini update on where he's at in the benchmarking process. Joe, we'd love to hear a couple minutes from you here, buddy.
Sure. Thanks, guys, for having me back. Have gotten quite a bit of work done in the past 2 weeks on this benchmarking project. I'll share my screen and try to give a quick update on that.
That's why Travis isn't here today. He was filling in for everything Joe was supposed to be doing this last couple of weeks.
Pretty bold move, leaving me unsupervised. Hopefully, I don't go rogue and cause any issues for him. No, so work that's happened in the past 2 weeks. I've added a few cities after talking with folks like Andrew and Ann Salier from the BPW, as well as some connections with the Urban Sustainability Directors Network. So just a few cities in the bottom here. Picked out for being pretty close, and as you can see, there's a good concentration of those green dots that are indicators for cities that are close to us. Also rounded out some of the profit data in this section here, just getting more of a picture of the city's financial position. A note to be made there again, that there's kind of those margins that can be adjusted for what is considered close and not close. So those will need to be refined. And then I think, as Brian put it, I also kind of come into this with the understanding of a kindergartner on some of these pieces. So I will be circling back with the people I touched base with to learn about kind of these key indicators to make sure what we have here is representative of what we're looking for. And those metrics seem right. So things are certainly getting closer to being to a place where we can start drawing conclusions, but just not quite there yet. So we're working along. And then of course, kind of the piece that I was tasked with mostly at that last touch point was filling out this planet section. So no worries, this is not empty, but we just need to drill down into those. So I've been trying to keep up with the levers that have been discussed so far and have a little bit of work left to do there. So we talked about offsets last time. I can open that up and scroll over. Hopefully you guys can see this all right. So the three indicators I have right now, and again, these can be refined if we think there's more to look at, would be, does the city have or mention a carbon offset purchasing plan now or in the future? Do they have a REC purchasing plan now or in the future? And then what we started today with, you guys talked about, is there a pass-through for customers to somehow buy into a renewable energy rate? Not necessarily RECs, but some type of renewable energy or clean energy program for them. So just initial conclusions, you can see there's a lot of places that are doing RECs, especially if they own their own electricity production, and keeping up with kind of those mandated requirements to have a certain amount of renewable energy. Carbon offsets do not seem very popular yet from what I've found in the cities we've looked at. And then there's quite a few different communities as well that are offering these pass-through programs for renewable energy rates. Some of those are through the local municipal providers, others are through kind of the larger providers, depending on how the city's set up and where they get their electricity from. If it's similar to the DPW and the city's relationship, or if it's a larger provider like a DTE or a consumers. So that is the offset section. I've started digging into emissions per capita, which is close to what was talked about today. In this current column here, this is the most recent greenhouse gas inventory that was provided. Those numbers divided by population. Holland measures emissions per capita, and that's a big number that we focus on, but that's not the same for all communities. So some communities just have a total emissions number, and we have to make sure that we get that to a comparable emissions per capita number. Might be missing a few. This is still work that's ongoing, but trying to get just kind of a good baseline there. And you can see that not everyone does this on an annual basis, or at least publishes on an annual basis. So it's just trying to get the best quality data we can get. And then the goal section here is looking at those targets, so what they're trying to reduce to in the future. Again, early conclusions would be a lot of people are shooting for a 2050 goal. There's some 2020s and 2030s also. And to explain the numbers that you see, so I've got the first number here would be where they're at or their target, and the second number is that date. If there's a percentage, that would be the reductions they're shooting for. So for example, Cleveland has an 80% reduction by 2050, Nashville 70% reduction by 2050. And I'll work to try to make that data a little bit cleaner and easier to read as we go forward as well.
Cool.
So that's emissions. Another section I've dove into quite a bit is reporting. I loved Andrew's metaphor of TurboTax. So there's a lot of different places that people can go to report and mechanisms they can use to make commitments. This is pretty easy data to find, luckily. So going through and just tracking what cities are using which mechanisms across the board here. And again, there's some more that can be added, but this is just the first attempt at finding that. Goals I've started to get into. This one is still one to have some work done over the next 2 to 4 weeks, but looking at kind of those different targets. So some people hone in on the overall carbon emissions. Some are just looking at the renewable energy percentage, energy reduction, the scope. So if they're looking at just the city or citywide, and then also funding. So how they're looking to fund these efforts that they're making. Electric portfolio, I've not gotten into much. This is just a place thus far that I've tracked whether or not a city has their own municipal electricity production or it's a larger provider. But that helps kind of feed into the conversation around things like offsets and reporting. So that will be one that will be built out. Building consumption, I've not touched yet. That will be in the future. Transportation as well. But yeah, just starting to get a good dive into this planet section. So that's where I'm at so far. As I've alluded to, just working on this planet section over the next couple of weeks here. Also hoping to try to sort out the cities to make more sense of cities at the top are closer to us and cities at the bottom are less close, so that we can get kind of a better picture of what those top cities are to be looking at. And then just any ongoing research. Again, this is a working piece. So if there's something that this group finds necessary to look into, a metric that I've missed or a city we want to check out, can always add those as we go forward. But then again, the ultimate goal here would be to kind of find those 3 to 5 cities that we can hone in on, and do a little bit more of an in-depth dive into the backstory behind the data that we see here.
Yeah, Joe, I see the first 3 columns of planet kind of being that those things that kind of are these end results. Then the next 5, again, just refresh everybody's memory on that. Those correspond exactly to the levers that we've been talking about in the opportunity matrix. So what we're really looking for here, again, is, what are the strategies that these different communities are employing to try to get at those end results that they're looking for, these overall goals, so that we can learn to see if there's things that are in alignment with what we're saying are strategies, or maybe different strategies that we haven't considered yet as well. And a lot of that, again, where those are most valuable, I think, are on the communities that are well aligned with Holland in the people and profit side of things as well, because those are going to be, they're probably going to be dealing with similar situations, big industrial sectors, for example, that there's a need to sort of focus on strategies associated with that. So this is really impressive, Joe. Great work. And I just appreciate you putting in the amount of time and over the last couple of weeks. So But I'll let the committee, if they've got any questions, but I just really want to remind them of that kind of that comparison to our opportunity matrix are really built within those 5 remaining or 5 endpoints on the planet piece.
Yep.
Great.
Nice work, Joe.
Really impressive.
Thank you.
I want to use it right now.
Now he still has to fill in some of the blanks.
I know.
We're getting close.
Yeah.
Look at it at length.
Yeah. Good progress.
Any other comments or questions for Joe?
All right. Thanks, guys.
Awesome. Thanks, Joe.
Yeah.
I think, there we go. All righty. We are moving right along. We have it's closing in on 5. We've got our draft report and we've got our resources document. Is there any updated noteworthy items, Dave or Keith, that we should be cognizant of? I see 121 on there for the resources doc. That's recent-ish.
Yeah, the Rocky Mountain stuff.
Yeah, I don't know if I would specifically highlight anything. I think I hope, we have a pretty good methodology in there where if you go back, you can see an updated date and then you know what's being added in there.
Yep.
I know that Jeff sent some stuff over, so we captured that. We haven't had time, and there's some other things that are eating up and I'm sure Dave's and certainly Cinca's time too. So at some point we might really shake this up on you, right? Because we talked about maybe reorienting the resource document to align with the 5 levers, kind of the opportunity matrix. I kind of kicked myself about that. We probably should have set that up in that format from the beginning, but I think that'll make the end document, more effective. But otherwise, no, I don't.
Yeah.
Dave, can you think of anything?
No, just 2 main resources there, as you pointed out. Jeff submitted some information on articles describing the effects of different incentive structures for residential solar. And that's the last document you'll see here under opportunities for portfolio changes. And then under the Rocky Mountain Institute, there's the carbon-free city handbook, both of those dated of January 21. So those are the 2 main resources that are added to the list, but nothing new on the report. Again, the report, next phase of the report is getting into that discussion of the community. And that's really the heart of what Joe's working on right now. So once we have the culmination of that, I think we can start creating the narrative, creating the draft around that piece of it. And then as we're continuing to work through the levers, ultimately there'll be a section kind of dealing with all the recommended strategies, by the different lever areas as well, kind of rounding out that piece of that. So I don't think we have anything really to add. I think the one thing maybe to add that's not on the agenda specifically, and I think the leadership group, Brian and Travis know this as well, is that my only thoughts really is that we've been moving along at this cadence, and it's been really good. And we've been having an education topic, revisiting it and things like that. There's going to be a point where this group, is going to want to have some outreach and purposeful engagement with different sectors of the community to gain input on the process too, that public engagement, which comes via every meeting, public comment, but may want to have something that's a little bit more intentional about that. So just, again, putting that in there, I think Keith and I are ready to start looking at teeing up, the next educational piece. I know that we have a tactical action team right now that has developed an educational plan for the CEP. So education could be a next new topic, and that group could report out to you what they're looking at. And obviously the ODC is instrumental with that as well. So there's some that could be an educational topic, but then we've also got transportation, where we have a proposal from Ford Mobility to look at a broader strategic plan associated with mobility in the community. So that's something that we could spend some time on. And then the last piece of it, obviously, that we haven't gotten into deeply yet is the building energy consumption, which by sector has different opportunities. Residential, we have obviously a program going on with on-bill financing and home energy retrofits, but then commercial industrial obviously is a big piece of the pie, as we've talked about. So those are the last three levers that have an educational session and then follow up associated with those two. So,
and just because Brian and I, we've been really nice to each other so far in this meeting, I don't think Brian's interested in the building and the commercial energy consumption at all. So we'll schedule that one. Look at him.
Probably because he doesn't know anything about it.
Disgusted with me right now, isn't he?
70% of the freaking number, Keith. It doesn't matter what I do. It doesn't matter what I do for a day job. Let's talk about the number. Mobility.
I actually was just demonstrating. I hear you every time you talk, Brian. I'm registering it, man.
Brother. I'm not biased. I'm just looking at the pie chart. This is, I think, my sense, all of these are good topics, but the building consumption, starting with industrial and moving our way into commercial, that's 70% of the number. Mm-hmm. We just have to, and we got to get feedback from the business community. So we got to do learnings. We got to think, we got to engage feedback from them. That's, if our job is to do 3 to 5 year strategy priorities, 70% of the number feels like a place we need to be spending a fair amount of time on. As much as I like mobility and all the rest of this stuff, it's just not as big of a piece of the pie. So so that's my sense, is we need to start talking about that pretty intentionally.
And I like the idea of engaging with the community, whether it's businesses, industry, people in the community, education, because we can do top down, but we also need information and cooperation and excitement from the bottom up.
Yeah.
To make it all work.
Buy-in. Yep.
Yeah, I guess I think mobility, like in large part, a lot of the key things that will drive changes in transportation are outside of our hands, right? It's GM announcing that they're only going to be selling electric cars by 2035. It's the fact that Tesla is the most valuable car maker in the world right now. Like, these are the things that are driving transportation. We can, do things to make sure that we play along with that. But those are the things that are really that's the lever, right? In transportation, it's those kind of players. I think the industry section, the fact that it's 70% of the pie, that makes or industry and commercial, that makes that clearly the main target. I guess the one comment I have against that, I think residential is the least agile of all the sectors, right? If you really want to start to address residential outside of electricity use, that's the sector that you can't be dynamic, because there's not profit to be made, and you're not going to be doing some of the same kinds of things that industry is. So in some sense, even if it's not as large of a piece of the pie, if it's not as agile, it does pay dividends to start early, rather than saying, oh, that's a small bit, let's focus on this big part of the pie. This is, just a little bit of the wedge. If that's the part of the wedge that's going to be slower to transform, like, for example, if you're we'll get to this later, but.
Yeah, no, Jeff, I think that's really good. And I'm not suggesting we don't touch on the other things.
No, I understand that. I'm just trying to kind of frame what you're saying. And I know that you understand that as well.
Yeah. And I think that and maybe I'm wrong, but I think that a lot of the last 10 years, outside of the new power plant, has been a lot of the significant efforts for the CEP have been made around residential, like the on-bill financing and the home energy retrofit program. And so I think those are going to be like, wow, these are cool. These are like very progressive programs we've been doing. How do we got to tweak them? What do we got to tell council to get them to get, everybody on board with tweaking them to get them better more adoption? I don't know that we're going to be, thinking of things from scratch so much, but maybe we will. I don't know. But we got to get to all of it, right? So I guess my question for you, Dave, is on the industrial commercial, how would we go about the education, or do we touch base on this offline in terms of how we want to educate? I mean, because Ann's got the rebate program. We've got the 4R study from 5 or 6 years ago that we can bring up and catch people up to speed on and dig into more. Do we want to? Yeah, because
there's a lot there, right? And that's one of the reasons we were kind of, not to be tongue in cheek about it, but going last was that because it is so diverse in terms of the possible strategies and programs. I mean, we could certainly fill you in on everything that we've done and are doing, but Joe's work, I think, is so instrumental and important to this because, that's where the new ideas might need to come from. I mean, the opportunity matrix has a number of strategies in there, but they're all potential strategies that I think have some really tough questions in them. And so, let me just, again, if I can share my screen real quick, just to throw that up here, I don't know if everybody knows what PACE is, but PACE is a property assessed, efficiency program for, commercial, type of buildings. And so this is something that is a much bigger lift from a capital need than even the residential, properties, right? I mean, because, how would we create a funding mechanism for it, and create some sort of ability there? It's an important topic. It happens in other areas. So PACE is one potential strategy. Maybe that's the focus of an educational session, to learn about PACE. But then there are some policy level issues that may or may not be in our control. And I know Keith is very, very adamant about saying, yes, but, there's certain things by statute we don't have the ability to do, like changing building codes on our own. We can encourage and promote, builders and developers to go beyond the code. But, some of these things are mandates, within these potential things here. So we're ready to try to help. We can look for resources that are out there, Brian. I think PACE is one area for sure, but there may be other things that Joe comes up with too that we go, oh, let's talk to these people because they've already kind of, invented that wheel. So that's one of the reasons that not to be tongue in cheek, but we just kind of had it last because it was one that we probably didn't have. Keith and I didn't have something zeroed in on.
Yeah.
Somebody to come in and address it.
Well, I know I can be helpful there. If you have education pretty well teed up for an update, like what's happening with ODC, that doesn't strike me like 2 meetings worth. Is that a whole month worth of meetings getting the update on education? And
I think it's broader than just ODC. But I think it's something again to give you the information and then talk to you about the strategies that could be employed around that to make sure that those are things that you're in alignment with and there aren't additional ones maybe to do. And then we move on from that. I think it's just like we did the other ones.
Brian, I don't know if this is exactly right because we're doing this together. But in a way, like I would see there's pretty strong potential that education could be like a meeting and then a recap, but then you could do transportation in the same meeting where you do the recap and then recap. So like instead of doing 2 meetings where it would take 4 meetings to get through those 2, like I'm pretty confident, for example, like we could do that in 3, or potentially we could even do it in 2.5, and then the half of the third one, right, would be where we could launch into the building consumption education, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, that's my sense relative to the pie and time. I mean, if one topic is 2 meetings and a month, you know, we're a long ways away. So that would, especially because education and mobility is, there's so many stakeholders that we are involved in that. So, and like Jeff said, like that's a market. You know, if the BPW wants to install EV charging stations everywhere because they want to fuel all of mobility for the future, I think that that's great. But that is happening, you know, that's all people are going to be able to buy in 20 years is EVs. So anyways, to your question, I think 3 meetings for those 2 topics is good. It's better than 4 meetings. It's not as good as 2 meetings. So I don't know what you think.
Or fast learners.
Push there, Brian. But again, I think it's worked really well. We'll work with the chair and the co-chair, vice chair, right, and continue to put these in front of the committee. And we found our rhythm, right? So yeah, hold on, we're keeping working.
Will we need to be concerned with any legislative changes or mandates coming down? That's kind of where the last CEP started. You don't know. Yeah. So
yeah, I mean, I think it's a reality, right? I mean, we don't know exactly what's going to happen, but I don't think we can ignore the fact that there's 2 things happening. One, at a state level, there's a council on climate solutions that are being pulled together by Governor Whitmer to look at how to bring Michigan to net zero by 2050. All right, so that's going to be a process. Those type of initiatives are good and they're instructive, and they tend to lead to legislative action afterward. I don't know exactly what the timing of that would be, and I don't want to speculate on what would actually come out of that, because there's a lot of work. Just like you're going through a lot of work on a local level, there's going to be 14 individuals on this council that are going to work through it on a state level. At the same time that's happening, you know, there's a new administration at the federal level, and there's going to be policies that are going to be put forward there. I don't know what forms they're going to take in terms of mandates, whether they're going to take the form of a carbon tax or other mandates that affect, our situation here. But I think we have to recognize that we're working in a footprint of a larger area. My only caveat there is an instruction to this group, I think, is, when we think about strategies, the risk is coming up with something that's out of alignment with a strategy at a state level or federal level, and the fact that you can pay for something then that you get no credit for because it's out of alignment. So that's the only risk, I guess, that there is. All of it is good and all of it makes progress, but sometimes actions can happen that are premature, and you spend money and don't really get credit against it, what the federal goals are.
I mean, I think, Dave, and maybe you do have more insight on this, but there's a risk in the other direction too, right? For something like a carbon tax, right? Where you haven't made or if you've made extra progress, then like you're ahead of the game already.
Yeah, I mean, so these things come out sometimes. I remember back when the acid rain program came out, Jeff, for sulfur dioxide, and the issue was we're going to reduce sulfur dioxide from this baseline year. So everybody that had greened their fuel sources prior to that year missed out on essentially the big change that happened. And so and so what happens is sometimes that early action is good in terms of the environment, but might not be good in terms of the credit you get for it in terms of the program. So that's all I'm saying is that, especially at a state level, when this process is going on right now, to be mindful of the fact that there's going to be something coming out of it on the back end.
Luckily, we should be cognizant of that.
Yeah, I guess.
Absolutely. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, but for something like a carbon tax or net zero, right?
Yeah, right. If a carbon tax is adopted, and it's purely something that is based upon, hey, what, like Andrew's calculation, what are you responsible for? That works, early action doesn't hurt us in that point. But if they're, depending upon how they measure it, I'm just saying that in the past, there's been situations where being out of alignment with those programs doesn't fully give the community or the utility, credit for it. That becomes a risk. That's all I'm saying. But I agree with you. Under a carbon tax regime, action early has value, and it's going to be something that improves the situation for the community too.
Has the state committee released any kind of a timeline, Dave?
I'm surprised they haven't been convened yet. Just today, there was a release that there's an advisory panel of like 4 or 5 people that are going to be working on equity, how to make sure that whatever the state comes up with here is equitable. And so I think that might run a little bit ahead of that to create some founding principles for this group.
Makes sense.
The release that the governor's office put out when they had the press release about forming the council said that those on the committee would stay in through their term of December 2021, I believe it was. So that though kind of begged the idea that people were going to be on it already, and they're not yet. So, and given where COVID is, I expect it probably to last a little bit longer than that.
But it's something, for our final report, as time goes on, there'll probably be some timelines that we can draw attention to in the final report, at least, and a few caveats would be wise.
Yeah, absolutely.
And just so everybody knows too, kind of like some of this is, we want to make sure that we're monitoring as closely as reasonable. And, like, I'm not going to spend all my time monitoring what's happening at the state or the federal level, but Dave stays pretty connected. And I'm also I asked to be and was appointed on the Michigan Municipal League, which is basically our statewide association. And I'm on their energy policy committee, which hopefully will give me the opportunity, most importantly, to hear kind of what the discussions are legislatively and otherwise, but also hope, have a voice into that process. So Dave's done this for a long time. So we're trying to position ourselves as best as possible. So we monitor, kind of what's going on, so we can position ourselves as best as possible as we kind of get indications of what's going to happen at the federal.
Well, and I applied to be on the climate council at the state level. I did submit an application for that, but again, there's 14 individuals, and they're looking for as much diversity of experience and background and things like that as possible in that. So, whether I'd be selected or not, I think is, I wouldn't give a whole lot of, strong potential on that, but it is something where, like I said, either on that or a subcommittee, associated with that. There'll be a lot of subcommittees, I think, that this group are going to be working for too. So we're going to try to stay connected to it.
Well, we get points for leadership then, don't we? Even if we didn't get the.
I hope so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. Let's do education. Let's do mobility. We don't need to rush it. So if it takes 4 meetings, we'll do it, but let's shoot for 3. With an eye towards the buildings after the fact, and we'll work behind the scenes on mapping out some of the specific content. I think there's a lot. I have a lot of resources and a lot of the facility, non-residential facility stuff. So that sounds like a good plan to me. Everybody else seem okay with that, or are there better ideas out there, which I'm sure there are?
No, that
I
sounds
think
good.
it's a good direction.
Okay.
And that involves community.
Better than 4 for these topics, because I think you're right. I don't think there's it's not as big of a thing.
Right.
So we're getting this preliminary list of strategies, right, as we go through all this. And so I think just a reminder here, you're making progress every time that we have these and we revisit the opportunity matrix and we add some potential strategies or revisit it.
Yeah.
We're now good way of looking at, we're 40% of the way through the levers at this point, right? So we're going to get the rest of it. I guess the question back to the committee again, do we get through all the levers, have these recommended potential strategies, and that becomes the point in time for the engagement then with the community to say, here's a preliminary list of strategies that we've come up with, and we test that? Do we support you in trying to figure out a way of doing something prior to that? How do you want to engage, I guess, with the community? Do we park that for next time and have a deeper discussion on that? Just wanted to make sure that we're supporting you.
You gotta go.
Yeah.
Let's make a point of maybe we start with that, a 15-minute discussion around that at the next meeting, and then jump into the education. I mean, those actually dovetail nicely, education of all these programs and how you guys even reach out to different sectors. I'm sure will be layered into that somehow, some way. So let's just punt that to next time.
Okay.
And we'll map that out for sure.
Yeah.
So,
great.
Cool. All right.
And next time, Brian, being the 15th at 3:00, correct?
I believe that is what is next up. Yes.
Right. Just make sure we're all on the same page.
Yep. I think we've got the through March, on the agenda there is sort of laid out, and then April TBD at this point. So.
Exactly. Good.
Perfect. Any other noteworthy notes before we adjourn?
I don't think so.
Nope.
All right. Thanks again to Andrew. Looks like he's still there. Really appreciate it. That was great. Good learning there. Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks,
Thank
Andrew.
you.
All righty.
Bye.
Yeah.
Take care, everybody.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye.
Adios.